Hi, everybody. I'm Gold Derby News and Features Editor Ray Richmond, and I'm here today with Mark Bridges, the two-time Oscar-winning costume designer on The Fabelmans, the semi-autobiographical film from Steven Spielberg. Welcome, Mark Bridges.
Thank you. Great to talk to you.
So let's jump right in and take us back to, if you would, Mark, to your first conversation with Steven Spielberg about working on The Fabelmans. You haven't worked on a lot of Spielberg films, as I recall.
No, this was my first collaboration with Steven, and we met over a Zoom meeting because, of course, it was still the touchy time of COVID, I think just the beginning of vaccines. So we had our first meeting over Zoom with producer Christy McCosco, and I had loved the script, and then he gave me some notes. I asked him some questions. One of the more exciting, intimidating things is that he said that his mom had a very unique personal style. So I was a little curious on what that personal style was. Of course, there are a lot of images of her later in life on Google images, but once I took on the project, I was given access to family photos from when Steven was very, very young, and his siblings and their grandparents and the parents through the years. So I was able to, from that, create an arc for the characters, for the story, and try to pick out what images I thought were strong and where we could use them.
I actually saw in one of your recent interviews, Mark, that you went back into the family home movies from the Spielberg family to uncover fashion tips. How did that inspire your work?
You're just researching. Whenever I do research, I'm looking for any image that can be a springboard for what could fit dramatically into a piece. So one of the striking things that was in, well, the family thing, we have the scene where Mitzi is dancing in the campground. There is some film of the mother dancing in the living room at their home in Arizona. And so I was able to get a sense of what the dance would be like, what she typically wore around the house, and then interpret that for our particular scene of the headlights and camping. And also at camping as well, she wears a blanket poncho that Mitzi wears a blanket poncho that was inspired by a blanket poncho that Leah had made herself, put a hole in a blanket, worn it, and it's in some of the home movies. So when Michelle showed up on set wearing that, Steven recognized what it was and realized what I was doing, and sort of gave a nod to that, and I could tell he was touched by it, and then went on that evening shooting. So I knew then that I had done right by all parties involved.
Did you use any of the actual articles of clothing or accessories or jewelry supplied by his sisters and parents?
I was offered some of Steven's mother's jewelry. Some of it was maybe a little too statement for what we were doing, but I learned from an early on conference call with the three sisters, just picking their brain of what do they remember about the mother's style. I was able to find out that she actually made turquoise jewelry and had a particular color turquoise that she felt was the most beautiful. And so I used that. Mitzi, she wears some turquoise jewelry at the dinner near the end of the film. And so you just always looking for things like that. I was actually able to, I took some of Mitzi's jewelry, Leah's jewelry, but I was never able to use it.
Did Steven go through his own closet to give you ideas for dressing Sammy Fabelman?
No, he'd gotten rid of those clothes by now. I have had another project where I actually used the characters that I was dressing their real clothes, but not on this one.
Tell me about, I heard something about a photo where Steven's real life mother, Mitzi, is wearing lederhosen, not typically considered a Jewish family accoutrement.
No,
But
well,
there's her personal style coming into play.
that's right. That's right. And I remember having seen that photograph, and then it was one of my first questions for the daughters. So what's with the lederhosen? And come to find out, she had there was a store in Phoenix that had a lot like national clothes from a lot of different places, whether it was Mexican embroidery or German lederhosen. And she thought they were cute. Later on in life, you see that his mom wore a lot of bib overalls. So that's the same idea, I think. And then one of the sisters said that at the same time she bought that lederhosen for herself, she bought a junior one for like the middle daughter, I think. So I thought, oh, that's a great way to go in the film. So the middle daughter, I would try to dress her a little bit like the mother in any of the scenes that they're in. Like if Mitzi has a blue blouse, the middle daughter has a blue blouse. Things like that. She was kind of the mini me for Mitzi. So things like that you come across in research, whether it's a real life person or someone you're inspired by for a fictional character.
I would imagine if there's any clash in any of that, Mark, it would have to come from the fact that Mitzi was obviously pretty offbeat in her choices in general. And the woman, and Michelle Williams playing his mother, isn't necessarily as offbeat in the script as his real mother was. So there could be a little bit of a dichotomy between how the fashion of his real life mother was and how the character is, because it is, after all, semi-autobiographical, not fully autobiographical.
Yes. So there are inspiration points. And of course, whenever I work with actresses, we work together to find that fine line of where it becomes character or caricature kind of thing. So, there were images that I found of Leah, Steven's mother, that I thought could translate very well without upstaging Michelle, but would be appropriate for the moments in the film. And the same thing with all of them. They all have their arc. I also changed the color palette depending on where we were in the story geographically. And hopefully you can't put your finger on it, but you feel like you're in different places or a different time. One of the things Steven asked for too is that perhaps the Phoenix section seem a little more colorful. And I thought that's absolutely perfect because that early 60s was a time of very bright colors. You look at the Beach Blanket Bingo movies, or you look at a Sears catalog from that period, and it's a very joyful, brightly colored period. So, no problem for me. I loved it, actually.
What did Steven's sisters, because he has real life sisters who were witness to everything back then, fashion wise and every other way, what did you met with them, I believe, right? What did they tell you?
We did a conference call because they're all over the country. One sister lives nearby, but the other ones are in different states. So we did a conference call.
Did what they tell you clash at all with what Steven told you in terms of how the family fashion went?
No, not at all. Actually, it fleshed it out for me because, I assumed that the girls would be more aware of what their mother wore and brands and things, and have a little more vivid memory than the boy of the family. You know what I mean? And so I was able to get, that his mother always wore these Bernardo sandals, and I use them on Michelle when they're visiting the house that Bert just recently built for them. Little things like that, and you see them for a moment, but hopefully Steven's sisters see that little touch and recognize it as something she wore. The younger daughter was remembering things that are later than our story. So Steven's oldest sister was probably my juiciest resource, and she's the one who had some of the mom's jewelry.
What about any inspirations for dressing Sammy's father, Bert, and what he remembered about his own dad?
The man was always a scientist in some way or form.
He looked so buttoned down all the time, and I know that was obviously a choice.
Absolutely. Even in the early, when he's younger, and there's in the early 50s, there was a manner of what a man went out of the house to go to work wearing. And I tried to contrast that. Bert is a white shirt guy. Benny is always a little more colorful, a little more vibrant in the early 50s. And then I thought, as his job moved on, and I'm always looking for things that are specific to a period. I look at old films and I'm like, what makes this 1927? What is specific about this? So, in the early 60s, short sleeve dress shirts, very much like NASA space guys, necktie and a short sleeve dress shirt. Pocket protector is not a joke. It's real.
No, it's not only the nerds did that. That was mainstream.
It was real. So you see him go from a younger man to a little more technology scientist. There are many pictures of the family dressed like that. Also, Bert loved the bolo tie even before they moved to Arizona. And so I wanted to throw that in. There was one that the dad really had that had a scorpion encased in plexi. And I was able to find one of them and so, just little touches like that Steven would enjoy, or the family would enjoy and recognize, but it wouldn't take away from our scene.
Did Steven, we hear a lot about him getting emotional, just because it's such an emotional and such a personal piece, the whole film. And you mentioned about the poncho at the camp scene. Did Steven ever get emotional seeing the clothes on set? I mean, I know that he did that one point to the poncho, but did it seem like the clothes themselves really moved him in particular?
I think because on some level we're recreating certain events in his life. I think two times that I think I remember. The first time was when all three main characters were together with Sam. The father, the mother, and the uncle Benny were all together at viewing the Boy Scout film, he was visibly touched by that, and it just brought back a memory of it, and probably a realization of what he's doing and what he's recreating and whatever. How could I imagine what he's going through his mind? But that's one time that I remember when he first saw those three together on set in costume to do this scene. And then, of course, the very difficult scene of his grandmother's passing, and which is so subtly and beautifully done and says so much about each of the characters. And so I think that was another time that was difficult for him. So whether or not it was the clothes, I mean, we talked about even down to the color of the hospital gown. I thought maybe we'd do blue for his grandmother, and he liked that idea a lot, rather than just something that is sort of typical hospital, something that was a little more colorful and not so down. And then he liked that I'd chosen this pink dress for Mitzi to be with her too. You don't want to have it all be doom and gloom. And I think we were of the same mind of this, even though it is a very emotional moment.
It seemed like he really trusted you, even though, again, you hadn't really worked together before. What do you think it was that inspired him to want to hire you, that came to you?
Well, I imagine, he's friends with Paul Thomas Anderson, who I have done 9 films with Paul, and he had just recently seen Paul's cut of Licorice Pizza, I think right before we started speaking about Fabelmans. And I think what I do, there's always a touch of feeling very real. And so, I think he wanted that feeling for the Fabelmans. I think he might have seen my work for Paul. And early on in the production, he also said he had rewatched again after like 25 years, Boogie Nights.
Uh-huh.
So whatever, I mean, whatever he saw in that appealed to him, I guess he wanted me to carry that over into the Fabelmans, although you couldn't get much farther apart, right?
No, you can't get much further from Boogie Nights than the Fabelmans.
Yeah,
But
but in any case,
both period pieces.
Period pieces, that's right, how you pull off a period. But in any case, honored to be taken into that group of Rick Carter and Janusz and Steven and Tony Kushner and Michael Kahn, just so proud to be included in that group. And, of course, wanting to do my best for Steven, who's a great collaborator.
It must be rare as a costume designer, though, Mark, to try to recreate what actual human beings wore from the director's life.
Yes, that's tricky. And but you mentioned that Steven had trust for me, and he did. He knew I certainly wanted to touch base with him and certainly keep him in the loop. But of course, he's got a whole film going. And I was hired to do that job for him. And so I did it. And I also, at some point, wanted to step back a little bit and put things out there for him and maybe surprise him a little bit or make it a little more spontaneous for him. And he was very open to that.
Fabulous. Well, I think that's all the time we have, Mark. Thanks so much for a fascinating chat. You're a charming guy, and here's hoping you land your 5th Oscar nomination when the Academy Awards noms are announced on January 24th. And take care of yourself, sir.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.